The August heat pressed down on Atlanta like a physical weight, the morning sun already blazing white against the glass towers of Midtown. Lieutenant Sarah Collins adjusted her sunglasses and felt the sweat beginning to gather at the small of her back beneath her tactical vest. Beside her, K-9 Max padded along the concrete sidewalk, his black and tan coat gleaming in the harsh light, his tongue hanging slightly as he navigated the urban landscape with practiced ease. The temperature had already climbed past 90 degrees, and it was barely 9 in the morning. Sarah guided Max along Peachtree Street, weaving through the morning crowd of professionals, clutching iced coffees and checking phones. This was supposed to be a routine patrol, a visibility exercise through one of the city's busiest commercial corridors. The K-9 unit had been requested after a string of vehicle break-ins in the parking garages nearby, and Sarah had volunteered for the assignment. Max needed the exercise, and she needed to clear her head after a brutal week of paperwork and departmental meetings. The aroma hit her first, rich, dark, complex. The smell of freshly roasted coffee beans mixed with something sweeter, maybe vanilla or caramel. Sarah glanced to her right and saw the source, Crescent Brew, one of those upscale artisanal coffee shops that had been popping up all over Atlanta in recent years. The facade was all exposed brick and industrial chic, with large windows revealing a sophisticated interior of reclaimed wood tables and Edison bulb lighting. A steady stream of well-dressed customers flowed in and out, lawyers and tech workers, and the occasional tourist snapping photos of their elaborate latte art. Max stopped. Sarah felt the leash go taut and looked down at her partner. The Belgian Malinois had planted all 4 paws on the concrete, his entire body rigid with attention. His ears stood perfectly erect, swiveling slightly toward the coffee shop entrance. His nostrils flared rhythmically, processing invisible information that human senses could never detect. She knew that posture. She had seen it hundreds of times over their years together, in warehouses and airports and traffic stops that turned into something much more serious. Max was alerting. Sarah scanned the immediate area, her training kicking in automatically. The coffee shop appeared completely normal. Customers chatted at outdoor tables shaded by large umbrellas. A woman in a business suit laughed at something on her phone. 2 men in construction gear carried paper cups toward a white van parked at the curb. Nothing out of place, nothing suspicious. But Max did not move. Sarah knelt beside him, placing one hand on his muscular shoulder. She could feel the tension thrumming through his body like an electrical current. His focus remained fixed on the coffee shop entrance, specifically on a point somewhere inside, beyond the glass doors. She pulled out her radio. "Dispatch, this is K-9 Unit 7. I'm at the Crescent Brew coffee shop on Peachtree, Midtown sector. My dog is alerting to something inside the establishment, requesting backup for a walkthrough." The radio crackled. "Copy that. K-9-7, backup en route. ETA 4 minutes. Sarah stood and observed the coffee shop more carefully. Through the windows, she could see the interior layout. A long counter with gleaming espresso machines, display cases filled with pastries, a seating area with perhaps 30 customers scattered among the tables and comfortable chairs. And there, against the far wall, a self-service station with napkins, stirring sticks, cream dispensers, and several containers of sugar packets. Max's gaze seemed locked on that exact spot. 4 minutes felt like an eternity. Sarah maintained her position, keeping Max focused while trying not to draw too much attention. A few passers-by glanced at the police dog with curiosity or mild concern, but most continued on their way, absorbed in the rhythm of their morning routines. When the patrol car pulled up, Officers Derek Huang and Melissa Torres stepped out with practiced efficiency. Sarah briefed them quickly, keeping her voice low. "My dog hit on something inside. Could be narcotics, could be explosives. I need you two to secure the perimeter while I do a walkthrough with Max." Huang nodded. You want us to start evacuating? Sarah considered the question. A full evacuation would cause panic and potentially tip off anyone inside who might be involved in whatever Max had detected. On the other hand, if this was an explosive situation, every second mattered. Not yet. Let me get Max inside first. If he confirms the alert, we'll clear the building. She pushed through the glass door, the cool rush of air conditioning washing over her. Max entered with her, his demeanor shifting subtly from alert to active search mode. His nose worked constantly, sampling the air, following invisible scent trails that painted a picture no human could see. The customers noticed them immediately. Conversations died mid-sentence. Fingers paused over laptop keyboards. The barista behind the counter, a young man with elaborate tattoos and a carefully groomed beard, froze with a portafilter in his hand. Sarah raised her voice just enough to carry. Atlanta Police, please remain calm and stay where you are. This is just a routine check. It was not routine. Nothing about Max's behavior suggested routine. The dog moved with purpose now, threading between tables, his nose sweeping the air in precise arcs. Sarah followed, keeping the leash slack enough to let him work, but tight enough to maintain control. She watched his body language with the intensity of a scholar reading an ancient text. Max passed the display case without interest. He moved by the register, ignoring the cash drawer entirely. He walked right past a large leather bag, sitting unattended beside an armchair, and then he reached the self-service station against the far wall. His hindquarters dropped into a perfect sit, his eyes locked onto the counter. His right paw lifted slightly off the ground, the passive alert signal that Sarah had taught him years ago. He had found what he was looking for. Sarah approached the station slowly. It looked completely ordinary. A wooden counter with a marble top, ceramic containers holding wooden stirring sticks and paper napkins, small metal bins filled with packets of sugar, artificial sweetener, and raw sugar, thermal carafes of cream and non-dairy alternatives, everything perfectly arranged, perfectly normal, perfectly innocent. But Max did not sit like that for innocent things. She keyed her radio. I need a hazmat team and crime scene unit at my location. K-9 has confirmed alert at a food service station, possible narcotic contamination. The coffee shop erupted. Customers surged toward the exits. The baristas abandoned their posts. Someone knocked over a chair with a crash that made Sarah's hand move instinctively toward her weapon. Torres appeared at the front door, directing the flow of panicked civilians, while Huang moved to cover the back exit. Sarah kept Max at the service station, maintaining his focus while chaos swirled around them. She did not touch anything on the counter. She did not move any of the containers. She simply stood there, her partner beside her, waiting for the specialists who would tell them exactly what kind of horror had been hiding in plain sight. The hazmat team arrived in 17 minutes, a personal record for Atlanta emergency response. The team leader, a stocky woman named Captain Diane Vickers, suited up her crew with methodical precision before approaching Sarah. "What are we looking at, Lieutenant?" Sarah gestured toward the service station. "My K-9 alerted here. Strong alert, passive indication. He's trained for narcotics and explosives." Vickers studied Max, who remained in his alert position despite the activity around him. "Good dog. Okay, let's see what he found." The team moved in with portable detection equipment. Sarah pulled Max back to give them room to work, rewarding him with a few quiet words of praise and a scratch behind his ears. He had done his job perfectly. Now it was time for others to do theirs. The first test came back in under a minute. Vickers turned to Sarah with an expression that had gone pale beneath her protective mask. "Fentanyl. The sugar packets are contaminated with fentanyl." Sarah felt the words hit her like a physical blow. Fentanyl in sugar packets, in a busy coffee shop where hundreds of people might have sweetened their morning coffee without knowing they were pouring death into their cups. "How much contamination are we talking about?" Vickers shook her head slowly. We'll need lab analysis for precise numbers. But my field kit is showing levels that would be lethal in a single packet. Someone did not just spill something here, Lieutenant. Someone deliberately mixed synthetic opioid into these sugar supplies. The implications cascaded through Sarah's mind. This was not drug trafficking. This was not a junkie hiding their stash. This was mass poisoning. This was terrorism. She grabbed her radio. Dispatch, this is K-9-7. We have a confirmed contamination event at Crescent Brew. Fentanyl detected in food service supplies. I need detectives, I need FBI notification, and I need someone to check the hospitals for unexplained overdose cases in this area over the past week. The next several hours blurred into a whirlwind of activity. The coffee shop was cordoned off with yellow tape. Crime scene technicians photographed every surface, collected every container, dusted every possible point of access. The media arrived in waves, news vans with satellite dishes clustering on the surrounding streets, reporters jostling for position behind the police barriers. Sarah found herself at the center of an expanding investigation. She gave her statement to Detective Marcus Webb, a veteran investigator from the Major Crimes Unit, who had the weathered look of a man who had seen too much and expected to see more. She walked him through the patrol, the alert, the discovery, watching his face grow grimmer with each detail. "Your dog probably saved lives today," Webb said when she finished. "Maybe a lot of lives." Sarah glanced at Max, who was resting in the shade of a patrol car, drinking water from a portable bowl. "That's what he does." Webb flipped through his notes. "I've already got calls back from Grady and Emory hospitals. 3 patients admitted over the past 5 days with symptoms consistent with opioid exposure. 2 have recovered. 1 is still in critical condition. All 3 had visited this coffee shop within hours of their collapse." "Do they remember using the sugar station?" 2 of them specifically remember adding sugar to their drinks. The 3rd was unconscious when the paramedics found her. She hasn't been able to give a statement yet. Sarah processed this information. 3 victims that they knew about. How many others had used those contaminated packets and survived with milder symptoms? How many had chalked up their sudden nausea or confusion to heat exhaustion or lack of sleep? The true scope of this attack might never be known. "What about the coffee shop itself?" she asked. "Who has access to that service station?" Webb consulted his phone. "The owner is a guy named Mitchell Crane. Built this place from the ground up about 4 years ago. The manager, assistant manager, and 6 baristas have keys and access to the back areas where supplies are stored. Beyond that, delivery drivers, maintenance workers, health inspectors. We're compiling a full list. Any of them have records? Running backgrounds now. So far, everyone looks clean, but we've barely scratched the surface." Sarah nodded, her mind already racing through possibilities. This was a deliberate act, which meant someone had planned it. Someone had acquired fentanyl in lethal quantities. Someone had figured out how to contaminate the sugar packets without being detected. Someone had chosen this specific coffee shop for a reason. That last point nagged at her. Why Crescent Brew? Atlanta had hundreds of coffee shops. Why this one? Was it random, a test run for a larger attack? Or was there something specific about this location, this owner, this clientele? "I want to talk to Mitchell Crane," she said. Webb raised an eyebrow. "You're K-9 unit, Lieutenant. This isn't exactly your jurisdiction." "My dog found this. That makes it my case until someone tells me otherwise." A faint smile crossed Webb's face. "Fair enough. Crane is being held for questioning at the precinct. I was heading there anyway. You want to ride along?" Sarah looked at Max, then back at Webb. "Let me get him settled first. I'll meet you there in 30. The drive to the precinct gave Sarah time to think. She rolled down the windows of her patrol vehicle, letting the hot Atlanta air rush through while Max sat alert in the back compartment. The city flowed past in a blur of concrete and glass, millions of people going about their daily lives, unaware of how close some of them had come to death this morning. Fentanyl was a monster that Sarah knew all too well. She had seen its victims on the streets, in the shelters, in the morgue. She had watched it devour communities and overwhelm emergency services, and turn overdose calls into a daily routine for first responders across the city. But this was different. This was not addiction or desperation, or the cruel mathematics of the drug trade. This was weaponization. Someone had taken one of the deadliest substances on the planet and turned it into an instrument of mass murder. And they had hidden it in sugar packets, in a coffee shop, in broad daylight. The precinct was buzzing with activity when Sarah arrived. Word of the Crescent Brew contamination had spread through the department like wildfire, and every available detective seemed to be working some angle of the case. Sarah settled Max in her office with a bowl of water and a chew toy, then made her way to the interview rooms. Mitchell Crane sat alone in interview room 2, visible through the one-way glass. He was a man in his late 40s, fit and well-groomed, with silver-streaked hair and the kind of perpetual tan that came from golf courses and boat decks. His clothes were expensive but understated, the casual uniform of successful Atlanta businessmen. He sat with his hands folded on the table, his expression a careful mask of concern and cooperation. Webb was waiting in the observation room. He lawyered up immediately, but the lawyer told him to answer questions about the business operations. Apparently, Crane is very worried about liability. Has he said anything useful? Claims he has no idea how the contamination happened. Says his security protocols are airtight. Says he personally inspects every shipment of supplies. Webb shook his head. He's either telling the truth or he's a very good liar. Let me talk to him. Webb hesitated. You sure? This guy has money, which means he has expensive lawyers who will pounce on any procedural irregularity. Sarah met his gaze steadily. I'm not going to interrogate him. I just want to have a conversation. She entered the interview room alone, pulling out the chair across from Crane and settling into it with deliberate calm. He looked up at her uniform, at the K-9 insignia on her shoulder, and a flicker of something crossed his face. Recognition, gratitude, fear. Mr. Crane, I'm Lieutenant Sarah Collins. I'm the officer whose dog found the contamination in your establishment this morning. Crane nodded slowly. I heard. They told me a police dog detected it. I wanted to thank you, actually. If that dog hadn't been there, if someone else had. He trailed off, shaking his head. God, the thought of what could have happened, what already happened to those poor people. Sarah studied him carefully. His distress seemed genuine, but she had interviewed enough suspects to know that apparent emotion meant nothing. The best liars were the ones who believed their own lies, at least in the moment of telling them. Tell me about your business, Mr. Crane. How long have you owned Crescent Brew? 4 years in October. I built it from nothing. Well, not nothing. I had capital from my previous ventures, but the concept, the design, the sourcing of beans, the training of staff, that was all me. Previous ventures. A pause. I was in commercial real estate development for about 15 years. Did well, but I burned out. Wanted something more personal, more connected to the community. Coffee seemed like a good fit. Any enemies from those real estate days? Anyone who might want to hurt you or your business? Crane's jaw tightened. Real estate development in a growing city like Atlanta, you make enemies. People who did not want a project built in their neighborhood, competitors who lost bids, contractors who felt they were underpaid. He spread his hands. But that was years ago. I've moved on. I thought everyone else had too. Names? I can give you a list, but Lieutenant, I really don't think any of those people would do something like this. We're talking about poisoning innocent customers. That's not business rivalry. That's psychopathic. Sarah leaned forward slightly. What about your current staff? Anyone with grievances? Anyone acting strangely? Crane shook his head. I treat my people well. Above market wages, full benefits, flexible scheduling. Most of them have been with me for years. They're like family. Any recent terminations? Another pause, longer this time. One, about 6 weeks ago. A man named Theodore Marsh. He was our night supervisor. Why was he terminated? Crane shifted in his chair. Inventory discrepancies. We started noticing that our supplies weren't matching our sales records. Small amounts at first, maybe a few dollars worth per week. But it grew. I installed additional security cameras and we caught Theodore on video taking supplies out the back door after closing. What kind of supplies? Coffee beans, mostly. Some syrups and flavorings. Nothing that would explain. Crane gestured vaguely, unable to complete the sentence. How did Theodore react to being fired? He was angry, very angry. He denied everything, even when we showed him the footage, said the cameras were rigged, that I was setting him up. He threatened to sue for wrongful termination. Crane rubbed his temples. He said some other things, too. Things I dismissed at the time as just someone blowing off steam. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. What kind of things? He said I would regret it, that I had no idea what I was messing with, that everyone who supported me would pay the price. Crane looked up at Sarah, his face pale. I thought he meant lawsuits, legal action. I never imagined he might mean something like this. Sarah pulled out her phone and opened the Notes app. I need everything you have on Theodore Marsh. Employment records, address, emergency contacts, any documentation from the termination process. The detectives already asked. My lawyer is gathering everything now. Good. Sarah stood. One more question, Mr. Crane. Who besides your staff has access to that self-service station? Delivery drivers, maintenance, cleaning crews? Crane thought for a moment. Our supplies come from a wholesale distributor. Different drivers each time, but they only deliver to the back loading area. They never go into the customer space. Cleaning is done by my staff after closing. Maintenance. He paused. We use a contracted service for HVAC and plumbing. They have access to the whole building when they're doing repairs. And who schedules those repairs? The manager, usually, or the night supervisor. Crane's face went even paler as the implication hit him. Theodore. Theodore would have been the one scheduling maintenance visits before he was fired. Sarah nodded. Thank you, Mr. Crane. Stay available. We'll have more questions. She left the interview room and found Webb waiting in the hallway. Theodore Marsh, she said, former night supervisor, terminated 6 weeks ago for theft, made threats against the owner, had access to maintenance scheduling and detailed knowledge of the facility's operations. Webb was already typing on his phone. Running him now. Theodore Raymond Marsh, age 37, last known address in East Point. His eyes scanned the incoming data. No serious criminal record, a few traffic violations, one dismissed misdemeanor for disorderly conduct 5 years ago. Nothing that screams mass poisoner. They never do. What about connections, family, associates? Working on it. I've got uniforms heading to his address now. Sarah's radio crackled. K-9. This is dispatch. We have a development at Grady Memorial. The critical patient from the coffee shop exposure is awake and asking to speak with police. Sarah looked at Webb. I need to take this. Go. I'll run down Marsh. We'll coordinate when you're done. The drive to Grady Memorial took 20 minutes in midday traffic. Sarah left Max in the climate-controlled vehicle with the engine running, a necessity in Atlanta summers, and made her way to the intensive care unit. The nurses directed her to a private room at the end of the hallway, where a uniformed officer stood guard outside the door. The patient's name was Rebecca Thornton. She was 42 years old, a marketing executive for a pharmaceutical company, and according to her chart, she had collapsed in her office approximately 4 hours after visiting Crescent Brew. Her heart had stopped twice in the ambulance. The doctors had given her less than a 30% chance of survival, but she had survived. And now she lay in the hospital bed, tubes and wires connecting her to machines that beeped and hummed with steady rhythm, her eyes open and alert despite the obvious exhaustion etched into every line of her face. "Miss Thornton, I'm Lieutenant Collins with the Atlanta Police Department. The nurses said you wanted to speak with someone about what happened." Rebecca nodded weakly. "I remembered something I saw at the coffee shop. I don't know if it matters, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. And the nurse said I should tell someone." Sarah pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down. "Tell me everything." Rebecca's voice was thin, strained by the trauma her body had endured. "I go to Crescent Brew almost every day. It's near my office. I always get a large vanilla latte with extra sugar. I know it's terrible for me, but it's my one indulgence." A ghost of a smile crossed her lips. "Anyway, that morning I went to the sugar station like always, but there was a man there already. He wasn't taking sugar, he was doing something with the containers." Sarah leaned forward. "What kind of something?" "I couldn't see exactly. His back was to me, but he was bent over the sugar packets, and his hands were moving like he was arranging them or adding something. When he heard me approach, he straightened up really fast, like he was startled, like he'd been caught." "Did you get a look at his face?" Rebecca closed her eyes, clearly straining to remember. Mid-30s, maybe. Average build. He was wearing a baseball cap, so I couldn't see his hair. But his eyes... She opened her own eyes and looked at Sarah. His eyes were wrong, cold, empty, like there was nothing behind them. "Would you recognize him if you saw him again?" "Maybe, I don't know. Everything happened so fast, and then later, when I got sick, everything got confused." Rebecca reached out and grabbed Sarah's hand with surprising strength. "He knew. That man knew what he was doing. I could see it in the way he looked at me, like I was already dead." Sarah squeezed her hand gently. "You're not dead, Miss Thornton. You're alive because you're a fighter. And because you remembered this, we have a better chance of catching whoever did this." She left the hospital with a description that matched Theodore Marsh in general terms, but was too vague for a positive identification. Average build, baseball cap, cold eyes. It could be Marsh, or it could be any of 1,000 other men in Atlanta. But it was something. It was a witness who had seen the contamination happening, who could potentially identify the perpetrator if they found him. Sarah's phone buzzed as she reached her vehicle. A text from Webb. "Marsh not at home address. Neighbors say he moved out 2 weeks ago. Landlord has no forwarding info. For over a decade. Left to decay while development focused on newer, more profitable areas. Perfect for someone who wanted to disappear." Webb coordinated the response while Sarah raced toward the location. Tactical teams were assembling. Aviation units were positioning helicopters. A perimeter was being established around the entire industrial zone. This was going to be the largest operation in Atlanta PD history, and it was all focused on one man who had decided that the world owed him a debt in blood. Sarah arrived at the staging area to find controlled chaos. Officers in tactical gear checked weapons and communications equipment. K-9 units from 3 jurisdictions waited for deployment orders. FBI agents conferred with Atlanta police commanders, negotiating jurisdiction and responsibility. She found Webb at the command vehicle, studying a projected floor plan of the target building. The structure has 3 levels and approximately 40,000 square feet of interior space, Webb said. Multiple entry points, numerous interior rooms, and God knows what kind of structural hazards after a decade of neglect. We're sending drones in first to get a better picture, but we have to assume Marsh knows the building better than we do. Let me go in with Max." Webb shook his head. "Too dangerous. We don't know if Marsh is armed, and there could be additional fentanyl contamination throughout the building. If your dog alerts on something and you don't have proper protection..." "Max can detect threats before we walk into them. That's what he's trained for. and I can stay back from any contaminated areas while still directing the search. Collins. This man has already poisoned at least 2 locations and hospitalized 4 people that we know of. How many more targets are on his list? How much more fentanyl does he have access to? Sarah gestured toward the dark outline of the abandoned plant. Every minute he's in there is another minute he could be preparing his next attack. Let me do my job. Webb studied her face for a long moment. Then he sighed. Protective gear, full coverage, and you stay in constant radio contact. Any sign of trouble, you pull back immediately. Agreed. They suited her up in a hazmat-rated tactical outfit. The bulky suit restricting her movement but providing protection against potential exposure. Max wore his own protective gear, a specialized K-9 vest designed to shield him from chemical hazards while still allowing him to work. The entry team breached the main door at precisely midnight. Sarah and Max followed the tactical officers into the darkness of the abandoned building, flashlight beams cutting through air, thick with dust and decay. The smell hit her immediately, a combination of rust and rot and something chemical that made her grateful for the filtered respirator covering her face. Max moved with focused purpose, his nose working constantly, filtering through the overwhelming sensory environment to search for the specific signatures he'd been trained to detect. They cleared the first floor room by room, finding nothing but abandoned machinery and piles of debris. The second floor was more of the same. Empty offices with collapsed ceiling tiles, a break room with an ancient vending machine standing silent and dark. What had once been a production area, now just a vast space of shadows and echoes. Then they reached the third floor. Max's behavior changed the moment they ascended the final staircase. His body tensed. His movements became more cautious, more deliberate. He was detecting something that put every nerve in his body on high alert. Sarah signaled the tactical team to hold position. She moved forward with Max, following his guidance, trusting his senses more than her own. He led her down a long corridor, past doors that hung open on broken hinges, toward a room at the far end where a faint light was visible beneath the door. She keyed her radio, keeping her voice barely above a whisper. Contact. Third floor, northeast corner. Light source detected in target room. Dog is alerting strongly. Recommend approach with extreme caution. The tactical commander's voice came back. Copy. Entry team moving to your position. Sarah waited in the corridor, one hand on Max's harness, watching that thin line of light beneath the door. What was behind it? Theodore Marsh and his arsenal of chemical weapons. A trap designed to take out anyone who came looking. Or nothing at all, just an empty room with a lantern left burning. The entry team arrived, 4 officers in full tactical gear, moving with silent precision to stack up on either side of the door. The team leader looked at Sarah, a question in his eyes. She pointed at Max, at his alert posture, and made a gesture indicating potential chemical hazard. The team leader nodded. He held up 3 fingers. 2, 1. The door flew open. Theodore Marsh sat in the center of the room, surrounded by a fortress of chemical containers and laboratory equipment. He was a small man, unremarkable in every way, with thinning hair and glasses that caught the light from the camping lantern beside him. He did not run. He did not fight. He simply looked up at the officers flooding into the room and smiled. "I was wondering when you'd find me," he said. His voice was calm, almost pleasant, like a host greeting expected guests. "I was starting to think I'd overestimated the Atlanta Police Department. Theodore Marsh, you're under arrest for multiple counts of attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, and domestic terrorism." The tactical leader approached with handcuffs ready. "Put your hands where I can see them." Marsh raised his hands slowly, still smiling. "You know the best part? You found 1 building, 1 list. But do you really think this is all of it? Do you think I spent 3 years planning, and this is the extent of my vision?" Sarah stepped into the room, Max beside her. The dog's alert had not relaxed. If anything, he seemed more agitated now, his attention fixed not on Marsh, but on something behind him. "What's behind you, Marsh?" His smile widened. "Just my insurance policy. A little something to ensure that even if you caught me, my message would still be delivered." Sarah's blood went cold. She looked past Marsh to the wall behind him and saw what Max had detected. A large industrial container rigged with wires that connected to a small electronic device. A timer counting down from less than 2 minutes. "Bomb!" she shouted. "Everybody out, now!" The room exploded into chaos. Officers grabbed Marsh and dragged him toward the door. Sarah turned to run, but felt Max pulling against his leash, pulling toward the device instead of away from it. "Max, come!" she commanded, her voice sharp with fear. But Max had seen something. His nose had detected something, and for reasons she would never fully understand, he lunged toward the device, his teeth closing on a wire that connected the timer to the container. He pulled. The wire came free. The timer continued counting, but nothing happened when it reached 0. No explosion, no dispersal of whatever chemical nightmare Marsh had packed into that container. Just silence and the frantic breathing of officers who had come within seconds of death. Sarah fell to her knees beside Max, her hands running over his body, checking for injuries, for contamination, for any sign that his heroic act had cost him something. He looked up at her with bright eyes and a wagging tail, completely unaware that he had just saved a dozen lives. "Good boy," she whispered, her voice breaking. "The best boy." The aftermath stretched through the night and into the following days. Theodore Marsh was processed, arraigned, and held without bail on charges that would keep him in prison for multiple lifetimes. The bomb he had constructed was analyzed and found to contain enough aerosolized fentanyl to kill everyone within a quarter-mile radius if it had detonated as designed. The abandoned building had been chosen specifically because it sat beneath the flight path of Hartsfield-Jackson. The dispersed fentanyl would have drifted across the airport and the surrounding neighborhoods, potentially killing thousands. Max had stopped it. One dog, following his training and his instincts, had prevented a catastrophe that would have dwarfed any terror attack in American history. The media called him a hero. The mayor gave him a commendation. K-9 units across the country cited his actions as an example of the extraordinary bond between handler and dog. But Sarah knew the truth. Max had not acted because he understood the stakes or appreciated his own heroism. He had acted because she had trained him to trust his nose, to follow scent trails wherever they led, to never give up until the job was done. And in that final moment, when every human instinct screamed at him to flee, he had trusted his training and his partnership with the woman who had been by his side for 7 years. That was the real lesson. Not heroism in the dramatic sense, but dedication, consistency, the daily, unglamorous work of building trust and skill, and the kind of bond that could withstand even the most terrifying circumstances. 2 weeks after the arrest, Sarah took Max to the park for what had become their evening ritual. The sun was setting over Atlanta, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and families were enjoying the last warm hours of the day. Dogs chased frisbees, couples walked hand in hand. The city hummed with the ordinary rhythms of life, unaware of how close it had come to tragedy. Sarah threw a tennis ball, and Max bounded after it with the joy and energy that made her heart swell every single time. He was not thinking about fentanyl or bombs or the man who had wanted to watch the world burn. He was thinking about the ball, about the grass beneath his paws, about the simple pleasure of running and playing with his person. She caught the ball when he returned it and knelt to scratch behind his ears. "You know what, buddy? I think we've earned a few quiet days. What do you say to some lazy mornings and long naps?" Max's tail wagged, his tongue lolling in that goofy grin that always made her laugh. "Yeah," she said, "that's what I thought." But even as she said it, she knew their quiet days would be numbered. Atlanta needed them. The K-9 unit needed them, and somewhere out there, another threat was brewing, another darkness was gathering, another monster was planning to hurt innocent people. When that threat emerged, she and Max would be ready. They always were. Her phone buzzed. A text from Webb. New case, drug lab in an abandoned school. K-9 sweep requested. You available tomorrow? Sarah looked at Max, who was already alert, sensing the shift in her energy. She smiled and typed her response. We're always available. Send the address. The sunset continued to paint the sky as they walked back to the car together, handler and dog, partners in every sense of the word. Tomorrow would bring new dangers, new challenges, new opportunities to serve and protect. But tonight, they had each other, and that was enough. The Crescent Brew attack became a case study in domestic terrorism prevention. Mitchell Crane rebuilt his coffee shop with enhanced security measures and a memorial plaque honoring the victims of the contamination. Rebecca Thornton recovered fully and became an advocate for first responder funding, often citing the police dog that had saved her life. Theodore Marsh never expressed remorse. In his confession, delivered with the same pleasant calm he had shown during his arrest, he explained that he had simply wanted the world to acknowledge his existence. He had wanted to matter. He had wanted to leave a mark that no one could ignore. He succeeded in a way. His mark was the legislation that followed. The enhanced protocols for chemical threat detection, the national training program for K-9 units that bore Max's name. His mark was the increased funding for mental health services and workplace support programs designed to catch people before they fell into the abyss of isolation and rage. His mark was the reminder that evil does not always announce itself with dramatic declarations and obvious warning signs. Sometimes it festers quietly, invisibly, in the hearts of people who feel unseen and unheard. And sometimes the only thing standing between that evil and catastrophe is a woman and her dog, patrolling the streets, trusting each other, ready to respond when the moment demands it. Sarah Collins never forgot that lesson. In all the years that followed, through all the cases and commendations and quiet moments in the park, she carried the memory of that morning outside the coffee shop, the moment Max stopped. The moment his instinct signaled what no human sense could detect. The moment that began a chain of events ending with saved lives and justice served. That was the work. That was the calling. And she would continue to answer it for as long as she could, with her partner by her side, until the day came when they could finally rest. But not yet. Not while there was still work to be done. As they drove away from the park that evening, Max curled up in his compartment, finally allowing himself to sleep. Sarah made a silent promise. To the victims of Theodore Marsh, to the city of Atlanta, to the dog who trusted her with his life every single day. She would be ready. They would be ready. Whatever came next, they would face it together, and together they would prevail. The weeks following the Marsh case brought a strange kind of normalcy to Sarah's life. The media attention gradually faded. The commendations were filed away. The urgent briefings became routine paperwork. And through it all, Max remained her constant companion, her partner, her anchor in a world that often felt chaotic and unpredictable. She used the quieter period to focus on training, both for herself and for Max. They worked on new scent detection protocols, developed in response to the Crescent Brew attack. They practiced building searches and vehicle inspections and the dozens of other scenarios that might one day save lives. And in the evenings when the work was done, they simply existed together, sharing space and silence and the comfortable familiarity of beings who knew each other completely. It was during one of these quiet evenings that Sarah received a call that would change everything. The voice on the other end was Captain Diana Morrison, commander of the Special Operations Division. Morrison was a legend in the department, A woman who had risen through the ranks through pure competence and unshakable integrity. She did not make social calls. Collins, I need you at headquarters first thing tomorrow morning. Something's come up. Can you give me any details, Captain? A pause. Not over the phone. Just be there. And Collins, this one's going to be different. Sarah spent the night wondering what different meant. In her experience, different usually meant difficult, dangerous, the kind of case that kept officers awake at night and haunted them for years afterward. When she arrived at headquarters the next morning with Max at her side, Morrison was waiting in a conference room that had been cleared of all personnel. The captain was a striking woman in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that missed nothing. "Close the door," Morrison said, "and sit down." Sarah obeyed, keeping Max close. The dog seemed to sense the tension in the room, his ears pricked and alert, his body positioned to respond to any threat. Morrison slid a folder across the table. "What I'm about to tell you is classified. The FBI is involved, as is Homeland Security. If any of this leaks, careers will end. Understood? Understood. Good." Morrison opened the folder to reveal a photograph. A man, mid-40s, distinguished-looking, with the kind of face that appeared on corporate websites and charity gala photographs. This is Howard Sinclair, founder and CEO of Sinclair Pharmaceuticals. Net worth approximately $3 billion. Major political donor, philanthropist, pillar of the Atlanta business community. Sarah studied the photograph. "What did he do?" "We believe he's been using his pharmaceutical distribution network to traffic fentanyl, precursor chemicals, to illegal manufacturing operations across the southeastern United States. The same chemicals that Theodore Marsh used to create his weapons." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. "Marsh got his supplies from Sinclair?" "We don't know for certain, but the chemical signatures match. The compounds used in the Crescent Brew attack are consistent with products that pass through Sinclair's distribution chain." Morrison leaned forward. "If we're right about this, Sinclair is not just a drug trafficker. He's the invisible infrastructure behind an opioid epidemic that's killing thousands of people every year." Sarah's mind raced through the implications. A billionaire pharmaceutical executive funneling chemicals to poison makers. The same chemicals used by a domestic terrorist to attack innocent coffee shop customers. The connections were almost too enormous to comprehend. "Why am I here?" she asked. "This sounds like a job for financial investigators and federal agents, not a K-9 officer." Morrison smiled grimly. "Because we need evidence. Hard, physical evidence that can't be explained away by expensive lawyers, and you have the best detection dog in the state." Sarah looked at Max, who looked back at her with those trusting, intelligent eyes. He had no idea what they were discussing. No concept of corporate crime or chemical trafficking or the complex web of money and power that protected men like Howard Sinclair. He only knew that his person was troubled, and he wanted to help. "What do you need us to do?" Morrison slid another document across the table. "Sinclair Pharmaceuticals is hosting their annual charity gala this Saturday at the Fox Theater. Black tie, $5,000 a plate, attended by every major player in Atlanta politics and business. Howard Sinclair will be there, along with his most trusted associates." "You want me to infiltrate a society gala with a Belgian Malinois?" "I want you to attend as a guest. Your cover will be a generous donation from the Police Benevolent Association, which has been arranged by people above my pay grade. Max will not be with you inside the venue. He'll be positioned outside in a mobile unit with full surveillance equipment, ready to deploy if needed." Sarah frowned. "Deploy for what?" "Our intelligence suggests that Sinclair uses these events to conduct face-to-face meetings with his trafficking contacts. The crowds and noise provide cover. The venue's prestige provides legitimacy. If we can identify who he meets with and where, we can build a case that even his lawyers can't dismiss." "And Max?" "If things go wrong, if you're compromised, if we need to execute an emergency search, Max is your extraction insurance. He can clear a building faster than any tactical team, and his alerts provide legal justification for searches that would otherwise require warrants we don't have time to obtain." Sarah considered the plan. It was risky. She was a patrol officer, not an undercover operative. She did not know how to navigate high society or blend in with billionaires and politicians. But she thought about the victims of Theodore Marsh. She thought about all the overdose deaths that might be traced back to Sinclair's chemical pipeline. She thought about the invisible infrastructure of poison that was killing her city. "I'll need a dress," she said. Morrison's grim expression finally cracked into something approaching a smile. "That's already been arranged." The next 4 days were a crash course in undercover operations. Sarah learned to walk in heels. She practiced social etiquette with officers from the intelligence division. She memorized the guest list and studied photographs of every person of interest who might attend the gala. And through it all, she maintained her training schedule with Max, keeping their bond sharp and their skills ready. The night of the gala arrived with unseasonable warmth. The October air still carrying the weight of a southern summer. Sarah stood in front of the mirror in her temporary apartment, hardly recognizing the woman who looked back at her. The dress was midnight blue, elegant without being flashy, designed to draw the eye without attracting too much attention. Her hair was down for once, falling in careful waves around her shoulders. Makeup softened her features, but could not entirely disguise the alertness in her green eyes. She looked like a woman who belonged at a $5,000 a plate charity gala. She did not feel like one. Her earpiece crackled. "Eagle 1, this is Overwatch. Transport is en route, ETA 5 minutes. Sarah touched her ear. "Copy, Overwatch. Eagle 1 is ready." The ride to the Fox Theater took 20 minutes in the Blacktown car that had been provided for her cover. Sarah watched the city flow past, the familiar streets of Atlanta transformed by the strange lens of her mission. She was not a cop tonight. She was Catherine Moore, widow of a technology entrepreneur, philanthropist with an interest in healthcare access for underserved communities. The lies felt uncomfortable on her tongue, but she understood their necessity. Howard Sinclair had survived this long because he was careful, because he vetted everyone who got close to him, because he trusted no one who had not been thoroughly investigated and found harmless. Catherine Moore was harmless. Catherine Moore was exactly the kind of wealthy dilettante who populated these events, looking for meaning in charity work and social connection. Catherine Moore was invisible in a different way than Theodore Marsh, invisible by blending into a world of privilege rather than being excluded from it. The Fox Theatre glowed like a jewel in the Atlanta night. Searchlights swept the sky. Luxury vehicles disgorged passengers in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. The air hummed with money and power and the barely contained excitement of people who believed themselves to be the most important individuals in the city. Sarah stepped out of the town car and took a steadying breath. Somewhere nearby, in a nondescript van, Max waited with a surveillance team, ready to respond if she needed him. The thought gave her courage. She walked into the gala. The interior of the Fox Theatre was overwhelming in its opulence. Moorish architecture soared overhead, intricate patterns and rich colors creating a sense of stepping into another world. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over the assembled guests, who circulated through the space like exotic fish in an elaborate aquarium. Sarah accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and began her circuit of the room. Her earpiece kept her connected to the surveillance team, who fed her information about the people she encountered. That woman in the red dress is the wife of a state senator. The man by the bar is CEO of a major construction firm. The group near the stage includes two of Sinclair's known associates. She moved through the crowd with careful purpose, making small talk, laughing at appropriate moments, playing the part of a wealthy widow finding her footing in Atlanta society. And all the while, she watched. Howard Sinclair himself was holding court near the main entrance, receiving guests with the practiced charm of a man who had spent decades cultivating his public image. He was taller than his photograph suggested, with an easy smile and warm handshake that put people immediately at ease. Nothing about him suggested a man who trafficked in the chemicals of death. But Sarah had learned long ago that evil rarely looked like what people expected. Evil could wear a tailored tuxedo and donate millions to charity, and still orchestrate the destruction of countless lives. The mask was the point. The respectability was the weapon. She waited until Sinclair had finished greeting a group of city council members before approaching. Her heart pounded beneath the elegant facade of her dress, but her training kept her external composure perfect. "Mr. Sinclair, I'm Catherine Moore. I just moved to Atlanta, and I've heard so much about your work in healthcare access." Sinclair turned to her with that professional warmth, his eyes scanning her briefly before settling into an expression of polished interest. "Ms. Moore, welcome to Atlanta. I hope you're finding the city to your liking." "Very much so, though I have to admit, events like this are a bit overwhelming for someone new to the social scene." Sinclair chuckled. "They can be intimidating, but I find that everyone here shares a common purpose, a desire to give back to the community that's given us so much. That tends to create connections pretty quickly." They chatted for several minutes, the conversation flowing naturally enough. Sinclair asked about her late husband, about her philanthropic interests, about her impressions of Atlanta. Sarah gave her rehearsed answers, all the while watching for any sign that he suspected her true purpose. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and something shifted in his expression, just a flicker, there and gone, but Sarah caught it. Tension, anticipation. Whatever that message contained, it was something important. "I'm so sorry," he said smoothly. "I need to attend to something, but please, enjoy the evening. We should talk more later." He disappeared into the crowd, moving toward a side door that Sarah knew led to the backstage areas of the theater. She waited 30 seconds, then followed. The backstage corridors were dimly lit and surprisingly empty. Most of the event staff were focused on the main venue, leaving these secondary spaces quiet and unmonitored. Sarah moved carefully, keeping to shadows, following the distant sound of Sinclair's footsteps. She found him in a small office, speaking with two men she did not recognize. Through the cracked door, she could hear fragments of conversation. Shipment arriving Tuesday. The usual channel, nothing traceable. Increased demand since the coffee shop incident. Everyone wants product. Sarah's blood ran cold. They were discussing the fentanyl trade, openly, casually, as if it were any other business transaction. She keyed her earpiece with a subtle motion. Overwatch, I have confirmation. Target is discussing trafficking operations. 2 unknown associates, requesting identification. The response came quickly. Copy, Eagle 1. Can you get photos? Sarah pulled out her phone, disguised as a simple text check, and angled it toward the crack in the door. She managed 3 shots before Sinclair's voice grew louder, closer. Check the hallways. I thought I heard something. She moved, fast but silent, retreating down the corridor toward the main venue. Behind her, she heard the office door open fully, heard footsteps beginning to follow. Overwatch. I may be compromised. Need an exit strategy. Affirmative. Proceed to the East Service entrance. Extraction team is moving. Sarah navigated the backstage labyrinth with adrenaline-sharpened senses, making turns based on the venue maps she had memorized during her preparation. The footsteps behind her multiplied. 2 people, maybe 3, moving quickly, no longer trying to be subtle. She burst through the service entrance into the cool night air. The surveillance van was already there, rear doors open, a familiar shape waiting inside. Max. He launched himself at her, not in attack but in greeting, his tail wagging despite the tension of the situation. She grabbed his harness and pulled herself into the van as the doors slammed shut behind her. Go! She shouted. The van lurched into motion, tires squealing on asphalt. Sarah peered through the tinted rear windows and saw 3 men emerge from the service entrance, their faces twisted with frustration as the van disappeared into Atlanta traffic. They saw me, she said, breathing hard. Sinclair's people. They'll know someone was spying on their meeting. The surveillance team leader, a serious-faced woman named Agent Chen, nodded grimly. But they didn't see you clearly, and they don't know your real identity. Catherine Moore can disappear. You and Max can go back to your regular duties until we need you again. Sarah stroked Max's head, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her fingers. What happens now? Now we analyze what you captured. Now we build the case. Chen's expression hardened with determination. Howard Sinclair has been untouchable for 20 years. Tonight, that started to change. The investigation that followed consumed the next 3 months of Sarah's life. She continued her regular K-9 duties during the day, but her evenings were filled with briefings and strategy sessions and the painstaking work of building a case against one of the most powerful men in Atlanta. The photographs she had taken led to identifications. The identifications led to surveillance. The surveillance led to patterns, connections, a web of relationships that gradually revealed the true scope of Sinclair's operation. He was not just trafficking precursor chemicals, he was the hub of an entire network. A clearinghouse that connected legitimate pharmaceutical manufacturing with the shadow world of illegal drug production. His contacts ranged from crooked plant managers to cartel representatives to politicians who provided protection in exchange for generous campaign contributions. And at the center of it all sat Howard Sinclair, smiling for photographers, donating to children's hospitals, playing the role of benevolent billionaire while thousands of people died from the poisons his network produced. The case broke on a cold December morning, a coordinated operation involving the FBI, DEA, IRS, and multiple local police departments executed simultaneous raids on 17 locations across 3 states. Sarah and Max were part of the Atlanta team, assigned to search Sinclair's primary distribution facility for evidence of chemical contamination. They found it. Traces of fentanyl precursors in shipping containers that were supposed to hold legitimate pharmaceutical products. Records linking specific shipments to known drug manufacturing operations. And in Sinclair's private office, a safe containing documentation of payments to officials who had protected his operation for years. Howard Sinclair was arrested at his home, still wearing his silk pajamas, his face a mask of disbelief as agents read him his rights. The man who had considered himself untouchable finally understood that no amount of money or power could protect him from the consequences of his choices. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Sarah testified about the gala, about the conversation she had overheard, about Max's detection of contaminated materials during the raid. Defense attorneys tried to discredit her, to suggest that she had fabricated evidence or misunderstood innocent business discussions. But the physical evidence was overwhelming, and the jury was not fooled. Howard Sinclair was convicted on 47 counts related to drug trafficking, money laundering, and corruption. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without possibility of parole. In her victim impact statement, Rebecca Thornton spoke about waking up in the hospital, not knowing if she would live or die, because a man she had never met had decided that her life was worth less than his profits. She spoke about the other victims of the fentanyl epidemic, the thousands of families destroyed by a poison that flowed through networks built and maintained by men like Sinclair. And she spoke about Max. I'm alive because a dog smelled something wrong in a coffee shop. I'm here because one animal, trained by one dedicated officer, did his job when it mattered most. Howard Sinclair thought he was invisible. He thought he was untouchable. But he wasn't invisible to Max. He wasn't untouchable when that dog sat down in front of those contaminated sugar packets and refused to move. Sarah sat in the gallery with Max at her feet, tears streaming down her face as she listened. The dog looked up at her with those trusting eyes, tail giving a small wag, unaware of the emotions swirling around him. He only knew that his person was there, and that was enough. After the verdict, after the sentencing, after the press conferences and the commendations and the inevitable media circus, Sarah took Max to their park. The winter sun was setting early, casting long shadows across the brown grass, and they had the space largely to themselves. She threw his ball, watching him bound after it with undiminished joy, marveling at how unchanged he remained, despite everything they had been through together. The coffee shop, the abandoned building, the gala, the raids. Through it all, Max had simply been himself, trusting her, following her lead, doing the work he had been trained to do. There was a lesson in that, she thought, a lesson about constancy and dedication and the power of simply showing up day after day to do the right thing. Max did not chase headlines or commendations. He did not care about the political implications of their cases or the social status of their targets. He cared about the work, about the partnership, about being useful to the person he loved. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was the answer she had been searching for, the meaning she had been trying to find in a career that often felt overwhelming and thankless. Not the big victories or the public recognition, but the simple fact of showing up, of being present, of trusting the training and the partnership and the instincts that had been honed through years of practice. Max returned with the ball and dropped it at her feet, panting happily. Sarah knelt beside him, wrapping her arms around his neck, feeling his warmth against the winter chill. "You're a good boy," she whispered, "the best boy. And tomorrow we're going to get up and do it all again." His tail wagged, and she could have sworn she saw understanding in his eyes. He knew, he always knew, that was the bond, that was the work, that was everything. And tomorrow, whatever challenges Atlanta threw at them, they would face it together. They always did. The case of Crescent Brew and the downfall of Howard Sinclair became legendary in law enforcement circles. It was studied at training academies as an example of how K-9 units could serve as the catalyst for major investigations. It was cited in congressional hearings about pharmaceutical industry oversight. It became the subject of articles and documentaries, and eventually a feature film that took considerable liberties with the facts, but captured something true about the partnership between a woman and her dog. Sarah watched it all from a comfortable distance, returning to her patrol duties, her training sessions, her quiet evenings in the park. She gave interviews when required, accepted awards when they were offered, but never sought the spotlight. The work was what mattered. The partnership was what mattered. Everything else was just noise. Max served for 2 more years before age, and accumulated stress began to take their toll. Sarah noticed it in small ways at first, a slight hesitation before jumping into the patrol car, a little extra stiffness in the mornings. The grey creeping into his muzzle, making him look distinguished rather than old. When the department veterinarian recommended retirement, Sarah did not argue. She had promised herself long ago that she would know when it was time, that she would not let pride or selfishness push Max beyond what was good for him. He had given everything to the job. He deserved peace. The retirement ceremony was held on a warm spring afternoon, with officers from across the region gathering to honor one of the most decorated K-9s in Atlanta history. Max sat beside Sarah on the stage, his medals gleaming on his harness, his tongue lolling in that familiar, goofy grin. He had no idea what all the fuss was about, which was probably for the best. The chief of police gave a speech about service and sacrifice. The mayor presented a proclamation declaring it Max Appreciation Day. Rebecca Thornton was there, fully recovered, tears in her eyes as she watched the dog who had saved her life. And when it was all over, Sarah took Max home. Not to her apartment, but to a small house she had purchased on the outskirts of the city, with a fenced yard and a porch where they could watch the sunset together. It was not much by some standards, but it was theirs. She was assigned a new partner, a young Dutch shepherd named Apollo, who reminded her of Max in his early days. She trained him the same way she had trained Max, with patience and consistency and an unshakable belief in the bond between human and dog. Apollo learned quickly, and within a year they were one of the most effective K-9 teams in the department. But every evening she came home to Max. She sat with him on the porch, sharing comfortable silence as the light faded from the sky. She told him about her days, about Apollo's progress, about the cases that reminded her of their time together. He listened with the attentive stillness he had always shown, even if he could no longer respond with the alertness of his working days. He passed on a quiet Sunday morning in late autumn, with Sarah beside him, her hand on his chest as his breathing slowly stilled. She had known it was coming, had prepared herself as much as anyone could prepare for such a loss. But the reality was still devastating. She buried him in the backyard of the house they had shared, beneath a dogwood tree that would bloom with white flowers every spring. The headstone she chose was simple: Max partner, protector, friend, the best boy. The department offered her time off, counseling, whatever support she needed. She accepted the time off, spending a week alone in the house, surrounded by memories, allowing herself to grieve. Then she went back to work. Apollo needed her, Atlanta needed her, and somewhere out there, another threat was brewing, another monster was planning harm. Another innocent person was depending on the thin blue line that separated order from chaos. She would be ready. She always was. But she would never forget. The coffee shop on that hot August morning, the weight of the leash in her hand, the moment Max stopped and everything changed. That was the work. That was the calling, and she would carry it with her for the rest of her life. As she pulled into the precinct parking lot on her first day back, Apollo alert and eager in the back compartment, Sarah took a moment to look at the sky. Clear blue, not a cloud in sight. A good day for patrol, a good day to make a difference. "Okay, buddy," she said to Apollo. "Let's go to work." His tail wagged, and they stepped into the familiar rhythm together. The work continued. It always did.